Welcome to the third day of the fifth edition of the LSIW Sustainable Investment Week. I would like to invite all of you to sit down, please. Thank you. We hope that for those of you who attended yesterday's sessions, you really enjoy them, and that's as much as you will enjoy also those sessions today. So yesterday, we had a very interesting investigation about ESG ratings, their challenges and limitations in light of the EU proposal for regulation that was done by Arendt Regulatory and Consulting. Deloitte did also a very interesting presentation about artificial intelligence and ESG. We also had an ENG session that gave a bright analysis of the impact of increased regulation on sustainable finance solutions. Impact also had presented yesterday the main challenges to access impact finance products and offer, of course, one of their solutions, what was called Imagine, Impact Securitization Platform. So if you want even some further information, someone here is there from Impact. Alan and Overy give also an overview of the ESG integration in the insurance sector. That was also very interesting and something a bit different, I would say. LIST, our Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology, give a scientific analysis of estimating environmental and social impact of investments using life cycle assessments with the example of green bonds and equity funds. And at the end, the last session was hosted by LPUA, the Private Equity Association here in Luxembourg, with a live panel discussion moderated by EY on decarbonization, the largest redeployment of capital in history. So now, before we start the session, I would like just to give you a few housekeeping rules. So please make sure you have your mobile phone on silent mode during the sessions, not to cause any disturbances. Please also ensure to give back your badges when you leave the conference, and you can hand it over to one of our colleagues or to the concierge at the reception desk. We will have a coffee break to recharge our batteries at 4 p.m. for 4 to 4:30. And lastly, there is also a meeting room available upstairs if you want. Upon request, you can ask any one of us if you want to access to it. So now I'm very pleased to welcome PRI, our partner, that is going to introduce their session. And so I'm pleased to welcome Céline Boudabey, Responsible Investment Manager at PRI. He will introduce their speaker. Thank you.
It's a bit of a maze. So, all right. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. It's a real pleasure to get the opportunity to speak in front of you. And also a huge thanks to LuxFlag for giving us the opportunity to speak at this event. And especially Viola, Nairi, and Isabel for their patience, because we've been terrible at meeting deadlines, which is why my name was actually not on the screen today. I have the great pleasure to be co-presenting this session with Sophia de la Valle, who is lead engagement and social transformation at the World Benchmarking Association, which is an organization with which the PRI works very closely on advance, which is the topic that we will be discussing today. But before I speak specifically to advance, I'd like to maybe give you a little bit of context and flavor on why we decided to discuss human rights today. So first of all, when we think about ESG integration, ENG screening, or even exclusion lists at investment level, it's pretty easy and pretty straightforward to find like those low-hanging fruits, those metrics that we can use, especially on the E part of ESG, right? Everything related to climate change, I think, speaks to the vast majority of you, right? Greenhouse gas emission, transition to cleaner energy, net zero commitments, all these things are, well, in the landscape, measurable, although we did see that we need to be cautious with the data available out there, but we do have data. On the G of ESG, well, we don't have that many things as for the E, right? But there has been tremendous developments in the proxy voting fields recently, and not recently, actually, over the last 10 years in the EU with the two shareholders' right directive, but also in different parts of the world. I'm thinking of Japan, I'm thinking of Brazil with the remote voting card. There are also some very lively discussion right now on good tax practices for corporates. So again, on the G, we have some very, very easy topic that we can identify and integrate to an investment policy. When it comes to the S, well, it's a bit blurry, right? How do we integrate social issues? So for impact fund, it can be maybe a little bit more easier, but maybe at a larger scale, the S is always and has always been a little bit of a struggle. So first point. Also because at the PRI, in our multi-year blueprint vision, we really identified human rights as a core topic of responsible investment. Lastly, we also believe that investors are slowly building a responsibility to at least take into consideration human rights risks into their investment strategies. As you might know, like the reference body of rules that is out there on human rights is the UN Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights. And this body of rules applies to both investors and corporates. There has been also a lot of changes in the EU legislative landscapes recently, and I'm pretty sure that you are all familiar with those very barbaric SFDR, CSRD, and for the topic today, the corporate sustainability due diligence disclosure. According to which, it is very likely that investors and corporate that are either headquartered in the EU or have significant shares of their activities in the EU, that they might be held legally accountable for any human rights abuse within their operations, but also within their value chain. That being said, what should be the angle in order to tackle human rights issue, right? And the angle that we chose, at least for the time being at the PRI, is through engagement, and more specifically through collaborative engagement. I think it's fair to say that collaboration is kind of embedded into the PRI's DNA. Of course, we are famous or infamous for our reporting, and I'm pretty sure that some of you have been struggling with the PRI reporting this year. For that, I apologize. But there is a lot more to the PRI than just reporting. We have a mandate to bring investors together and to bring investors together to share best practices and to basically present a united front in order to tackle those extremely important ESG issues that are threatening the world today. And this is why at last year's PRI in-person conference in Barcelona, we launched the Advance initiative. And I think I need to move the slides, right? Yeah, okay. All right, so everything I've just said is supposed to be on this slide. I was a bit late. I'm kind of a tech phobe, so I'm sorry about that. But it actually works, okay. So this is why we created Advance last year. And what is Advance? So Advance is an investor-led initiative through which investors will work together, engaging with companies in order to create positive outcomes for workers, companies, and societies. So as you can see on the slide, there are currently 255 investors that are involved and engaged in Advance, and amongst those 255 investors, 111 of them are actively participating in the engagement with the companies. So let me maybe pause a little bit here and explain why there is difference between those two figures. There are basically three ways of joining Advance. The first one is to be an endorser, and when you become an endorser of Advance, you publicly state your support for the initiative, but you are not taking an active part in engaging with corporates. So it's a way for maybe small players or people that just don't have the bandwidth to commit to the initiative, but to show support. And you have two other levels of participations. The second one is participant. The name is pretty much self-explanatory. It means that you will be participating in the engagement part with the corporates. And the last one, which is probably the most committing one, is the leader status for Advance, where you will be asked to coordinate engagement with some of the companies that will be under scrutiny. One distinction is quite important, is that there are prerequisites for participants and leaders. And those prerequisites are that they must have a human rights policy embedded into their investment policy, and they must also have a human rights due diligence policy that is already set up. And we do not require those things for endorsers. Who will they be engaging with? So they will be engaging with 40 issuers that have been identified from 2 different industry sectors. The first one is the metal and mining sectors with 25 companies from that sector, and the second one is the renewable energy sector with 15 companies coming from that sector. I'll come back a little bit later during the presentation on how and why we decided to choose those 2 sectors. There are also other stakeholders that are involved. Some asset owners, pension fund, insurance companies have joined the initiative. And of course, their engagement is much more with their investment managers and how they can set up like the due diligence process when it comes to tackling human rights risks. And at a later stage, so we are currently in phase 1 of Advance. It's a very young initiative. And we hope that during stage 2, which will normally launch in a couple of years, that we will also have this role of facilitating engagement between investors and local policymakers to basically improve the legal frameworks that surrounds human rights in the world. All right. So what are the priorities that we want investors joining the initiative to discuss with the companies with which they will be engaging? So the first one, well, I touched based on it already, right, is to make sure that the UN guiding principle on human rights and business are fully implemented. The second one is to make sure that corporates' political engagements are aligned with their responsibilities towards human rights. And I would add that this is even more important for companies that operate in countries where basic human rights are not secured in the local legal background and in local labor law. The final one is probably the most logical one, but which builds on the first 2, is that there is a priority setting work to do, and we need to focus on the more severe human rights risks and breaches that are out there, and we expect to see progress and deep progress on those issues. As promised, maybe just a few words on how we selected the sectors, starting with the metal and mining industry. So we have an internal tool at the PRI, which assess basically the risks and impacts of sectors when it comes to human rights. And the metal and mining sector ranked as high-risk sectors. So maybe just to give you an overview of the risks that we identified, many of those risks were connected to land usage. So for instance, the absence of prior, informed and consensual and consent when it comes to land use. We actually witnessed some cases of illegal land acquisition. Obviously, in some of those companies' operation, we also witness very poor workers' rights, such as the lack of basic safety equipment in an industry that is extremely dangerous itself, and lack of stable wages as well. And finally, also recourses to security personnel that can be either controlled or connected by military and or paramilitary organization. Another thing that I think is very important to take into account and why we chose that sector is that the mining and metal sector will have a crucial role to play in transitioning to clean or at least cleaner energy. What does that mean? It means that we will put some stress on an industry that is already at high risk of breaching human rights. And of course, this requires additional scrutiny. Then why did we select the renewable energy sectors? So some of the things that I just mentioned are absolutely transferable to that sector. It has also been identified as a high-risk sectors. The risk that I mentioned on land utilization or even illegal land occupation have been identified for this sector as well. Same with impact on local communities, security personnel, and maybe one that stood out a little bit was the pressure that was put on human rights defenders, where some were actually exposed to extremely burdenful, absolutely, well, not really motivated lawsuits that were really aiming at preventing them from, well, doing their jobs. But I would say that this was on the low end of the dangerous spectrum that they were facing. Some of them had their physical integrity threatened, and in some very extreme, unfortunate and sad cases, some were kidnapped and even murdered. Again, same argument as for the mining and metal sector. Obviously, renewable energy will have a crucial role to play if we want to meet the Paris goals, and if we want to align with the Paris goals. And there is also an obvious synergy between the value chain of the metal and mining sector and renewable energy, right? Those minerals that are needed to create renewable energy solutions comes from the mining and metal sector and are needed in the renewable energy sector. And as I was mentioning before, Advance really seeks at looking at the company's operation, but also at the whole company value chain and the impact of the company on workers, communities, and societies. Being mindful of time, I will just put this slide here, which is the company briefing that we give to investors so that you have an overall idea of what's in here, but I will not spend too much time on it. And just before leaving the floor to Sophia, I just wanted to mention that the assessment framework from ASCOR was presented a couple of weeks ago in Tokyo at the PRI in-person conference. So I'm bringing a bit of Tokyo to Luxembourg today. So the goal of this assessment framework is really to assess the progresses that were made by Advance. It's basically twofold. One fold is to assess the progresses that were made by the investor involved in the initiative. So measuring the engagement that they had with companies, the goal-setting process that they had with companies. And the second part of it is to measure the progress of the issuers that are under scrutiny for Advance. The framework itself has not been released yet, but it's a matter of days, maybe weeks. So you can be on the lookout for that. It should be released very, very soon. With that, Sophia, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Hope that you did well with the rain. Full disclosure, I'm fully soaked from here down. Don't judge me for that. So, I come in from the World Benchmarking Alliance. Some of you may be familiar with our work, some of you may not. So just really quickly, kind of to explain a little bit how we fit within PRI and within PRI and Advance. What WBA does is that we create these free and publicly available benchmarks to compare and measure companies on the SDGs. So basically the idea is that we saw that many companies were already claiming, driving progress on SDG 5, SDG 10, but it's hard to compare how companies may be or may not be really achieving these goals. So what WBA is trying to do as a non-for-profit organization is to assess some of the most influential companies in the world on how companies actually compare with each other regarding international standards, regarding existing indicators. So then that information can be publicly available and useful for all stakeholders. So of course, for investors and financial institutions, but also for policymakers, for civil society organizations, for employees themselves, to be able to kind of push and drive companies to improve, kind of a race to the top. And the way we do this is that we have these 7 benchmarks and 7 systems transformation. One benchmark you may know if you have been involved in the human rights space is the CHRB, Corporate Human Rights Benchmark, which is one of the ones we use. But the reason this is linked to PRI is that at the heart of every kind of company we benchmark, at the heart of all of our benchmarks, that's the social topic, the E's and ESG. Recognizing that, I think, as Selim represented really well, any transformation to sustainability needs to keep people at the heart. So decarbonization cannot happen if we're actually not ensuring a just transition, for example. We're not ensuring that workers' rights are respected. Same with the food and agriculture transformation, same with the tech transformation. How do we actually consider the impacts on people? In practice, what that means is that every time WBA assesses companies, we assess them on a set of core social indicators that are sector agnostic, that can be basically applied to any kind of company, any industry, any geography, and that kind of make up 20% of our benchmarks. And those indicators, which are actually these ones, and they're available in detail in our website, are the ones that PRI is going to use to track progress of the Advance initiative. So this information, which is already available for 1,700 companies on our website, is being used to provide a baseline of where companies are on their human rights and social journey. But then year on year, we're going to be able to see whether investor engagement and other kinds of initiatives like policymaking as well is driving further disclosure and further action from companies on social topics. So just to give you a really quick flavor of what our data has been able to show us so far, so hopefully if it piques any of your brains, you can also approach me later. We can discuss. We also have more data on other topics, such as climate, digital topics, etc. But just to give you an idea, a couple of years ago, actually earlier 2022, we launched a first baseline of 1,000 companies on these indicators. And that allows us to kind of have a state of play of company performance overall. So to tell you in general, how is the private sector doing on these fundamental topics? We found that it's not a really happy picture. We're hoping it's going to improve, but we find that most companies are below the 50% mark on the total scores, which is the image you see below. Only 1% of 1,000 companies actually have scores above the 75% kind of mark. We also found that on due diligence, which is a very important topic in PRI Advance in legislation right now, 78% of the companies we were looking at are not taking any step of due diligence or not disclosing taking any of the steps of due diligence. We're going to have another picture for 2,000 companies in July of next year, and we're hoping to see if there has been some progress in the last couple of years on that. Additionally, this kind of information allows us to also paint a picture of regional differences, right? Which countries have companies that are taking more or less action? Is this linked to any kind of progressive legislation, any kind of reporting requirements, etc. I think, yeah, already spoke to this. Oops, sorry, I thought I had more images. I think another important thing to mention is that if you go to our website, you can actually pick a particular company and see the detailed assessment. So if you want to know, well, it's company X actually taking the steps of due diligence, you can see there. Or if they're paying living wages, or whether they have working hour policies, you can actually go there, see on our website what exactly the company assessment is. And finally, I think one important thing I wanted to mention is, as we were saying, we can basically use this data to also understand a little bit more how social issues and social factors are related with other topics as well, right? So we can see, for example, if companies that do good on environmental sustainability or on governance are actually taking steps on social, or actually maybe it's not really very correlated. Is it that companies that prioritize environmental leave social behind? We're also able to look a little bit about what key elements drive better social performance. For example, we have seen that kind of board responsibility actually helps companies set all of the processes and the resources then kind of to prioritize social topics. And finally, our ambition again with Advance is that we're able to see basically what actions has been taken to engage with companies, to support them and to help them advance, and then correlate that with scores. So our ambition in that sense is that this data also helps you see whether the engagement you're doing, whether the work you're doing is driving kind of concrete company change on these corporations as well. Happy to chat a little bit more over the networking as well, but as of now, I'm going to leave it here. Thank you.
I think we do have 4 minutes to take a few questions, if any. So otherwise, we will be there during the reception if you want to connect.
Is there any question on this critical subject?
In respect of the benchmarking, the question how the companies are selected, and because there is always the concern that there is sort of selection bias when it's depending on how you determine which companies go to the scope.
Should I answer right away, or do we want to collect some questions first? Should I? I can answer that in the meantime, or? No, go ahead.
I can ask my question if you want. Do you cooperate with Sustainalytics, MSCI on the work that you do to ensure that you come up with the same process, conclusion? How do you cooperate?
Good question as well.
Thanks. I have a question picking up on the bias topic, but more on the result of the outcome of the analysis, because part of the inputs are from survey, self-assessments, right? No?
No.
Ah, okay. So it's in principle...
Publicly disclosed information that we collect ourselves and analyze ourselves. Yeah.
Perfect. Already replied then.
I can quickly answer those two questions then. On the selection of companies, we have a methodology of company selection, also transparent, available on our website. But basically what we do is that we select 2,000 of what we call kind of keystone companies for the advance of the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's identifying, for example, if we need to have a transformation of the food system, what are the key industries there? And then within those industries, which are the key players in terms of size, in terms of regional spread, in terms of supply chains, that if they move, they would move the market with them. If they don't move, they're probably kind of holding also the market from changing. So we call them the Keystone SDG 2000 companies. And yeah, we can also look at, in that sense, it's not, companies do not self-select. They cannot opt in or opt out of the benchmark. We inform them and they have an opportunity to respond and to provide any additional information we might have missed on the assessment. But as I was mentioning as well to the colleague over there, the assessment, we do it in-house, and companies are not self-reporting, but basically collating information that they're already reporting in the sustainability reports, annual reports, codes of conduct, and then analyzing themselves, like analyzing it ourselves in our methodology. On your question on how we integrate, depends on some of the indexes, depends on some of the platforms. Our goal is not to be a new reporting framework, but actually to use those reporting frameworks and then compare companies. And in that sense, our methodology is very directly mapped to existing indicators on GRI, on MSCI, on Bloomberg, et cetera. And what we're trying to do then is to reflect that. Because we're aligning kind of to the aspirational SDG kind of goals, in some cases, our indicators can be a little bit more ambitious than some reporting standards we may have on the ESG providers, for example, in terms of service providers. So in that sense, we probably build on existing standards, but always aligning, for example, with the ILO standards or what's internationally acknowledged. And in that sense, yeah, it could look a little bit different, but that's always also we try to be transparent throughout. So if you go to our methodologies, you can see each indicator is mapped against all of the other kind of relevant indicators on that same space.
Any other question? No, it sounds you answer them all. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.